Homework 8, Section 7.3, Simple Interest, Video 7. In this final video, we're going to talk about a rule called the Banker's Rule. And here's an example of a problem that would use the Banker's Rule. You borrow $1,000 from a bank at 9% interest. I've tapped the word simple. For 120 days. Calculate the interest and the future value. Use the Banker's Rule. So what is the Banker's Rule? The Banker's Rule is really simple. The Banker's Rule says that 1 year is marker's garbage. Made it. Even got the bounce off the wall. The Banker's Rule says 1 year is 360 days. Now, we all know that's not true. We all know that 1 year is 365 days, except in leap years, where it's 366. So why does the Banker's Rule say 1 year is 360 days? Well, let's set up the calculation for the interest, and then I'll explain why, and why they should get with the times. You may notice in this particular investment problem, or borrowing problem, that we have a unit of measurement for the time that we haven't seen yet, and that would be days. Well, if it were months, we would divide by 12 to convert it to years. What the Banker's Rule basically says is to divide the days by 360 to get years. I know there are 365 days in a year. But let's see what happens if we use 360, and then I'll kind of explain why 360 is used. Our formula is still the same, I equals PRT. Our principal is 1,000, so let's just write that in there. Our interest rate is 9%, so if we move the decimal 2 places to the left, we get 0.09. And our time is 120, but it's days. Banker's Rule says to divide days by 360 to get years. So let's see what that equals. Actually, I don't think I need a calculator. I'm pretty sure this is going to be exactly 300. But let me put it in and not be arrogant. 1,000 times 0.09 times 120 divided by 360. Because I was wrong, it's 30. I was off by an order of magnitude. That one. So our interest is $30, meaning, and the future value. The future value is the principal, which was 1,000, plus the interest, which was 30. And so our future value is $1,030, meaning 120 days in the future, this is how much I owe the bank. Okay, paying $30 to borrow 1,000, I guess isn't really that bad. But why does the Banker's Rule say 1 year equals 360 days? Well, the answer has to do with the setup and the calculation, and the fact that these types of problems predated technology. And when I say technology, I mean even basic 4-function calculators that can do division. Way back in the day, when people were investing money but calculators weren't a thing, these problems were done manually. If we had used 365, then we would set up a fraction that looks like 120 over 365 as a division problem, as opposed to 120 over 360. So why is 360 advantageous here? 360 is extremely reducible. There are a lot of numbers that divide into 360 evenly. Some of them are 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 9, 10, 12, 15, that's 16, 18, 20, 24, but as you can tell, 360 has the capability of being reduced by a lot. In fact, it's reducible by 120. This fraction equals 1/3, which is how I almost did this in my head correctly if I'd gotten the zeros correct. So why is that advantageous? Well, if I'm doing this manually, I could reduce this all the way down to 1/3, and that's a decimal I know. But if I were doing something like 120 divided by 365, 365 is not very reducible. In fact, I know you can reduce it by 5 because it ends in 5. What is 365 divided by 5? I'm not going to waste time doing it in my head. It's 73. 365 is only reducible by 5 and 73. 73 is prime. So if I wanted to do arithmetic with this, I would have to turn it into a decimal. And in order to turn it into a decimal, I would have to set up a division problem, stick some decimals on the 120, and then go to town doing this long division problem manually. So historically speaking, a fraction with 365 in the denominator was a lot more cumbersome to deal with in terms of hand arithmetic and decimals. But a fraction with 360 in the denominator has a possibility of being reduced a lot. And even if it didn't reduce to a fraction that I knew its decimal, I could reduce it and have a smaller divisor over here. So basically, 360 was used for the sake of simplicity when the arithmetic was done manually. Now, in this day and age, I can ask a device what 120 divided by 365 is. Go ahead and ask your phone. If you got it, say, hey Siri, and ask it 120 divided by 365. So the reason for the 360 is way outdated due to technology. So do banks still use it, and if so, why? Well, I honestly don't know if banks use it, but it wouldn't surprise me if they did. And the following example will show you why. Let's suppose we have the exact same problem, but don't use the banker's rule. Now later on, we will see some problems that involve days but don't use the banker's rule. And when they say don't use the banker's rule, you're basically saying that 1 year is 365 days. Technically speaking, it should be 365.25. That extra quarter of a day compensates for the extra day every leap year. But I digress. If we didn't use the banker's rule, how would this problem have played out? Well, the principal is still 1,000. The interest rate is still 0.09. But now we're setting up 120 divided by 365. So let's see what that does. 1,000 times 0.09 times 120 divided by 365. This isn't turning out the way I expected, but oh well. $29.59. And notice that the interest is a little bit lower. And so the future value would be the 1,000 plus the $29.59. $1,029.59. So, if we were borrowing money and repaying it with the banker's rule, we actually have to pay a little bit more. Okay, this is what I expected to happen. It's not a whole lot more. It's 41 cents more. But in other investments, that could be $41,000 more, depending upon the size of the principal and the length of the investment. So the banker's rule, when applied to loans, actually causes the interest to be slightly higher. So do banks do this? Well, ethically speaking, they shouldn't, but they might because that's how they've always done it, predating technology. It would be interesting to research banks and see how they handle daily loans and investments, or rather when the term is expressed in days. If they divide by 360 because it's the banker's rule and that's the way we've always done it, or if they actually use a more accurate number of 365. Now, if you were investing money instead of borrowing it, the banker's rule would be to your benefit because the interest paid would be higher. But if you're borrowing money, then the banker's rule, well, it's advantageous for the banks, which is why it's called the banker's rule. Gets them a little bit more interest. But I digress. In your homework, if it says use the banker's rule, what they're basically saying is the number of days, the time is given in days, and to convert it to years, just divide by 360. That concludes the series of videos for this homework assignment. If you have any questions, please contact me.